Chapter 11. The Thunder Child. If the Martians had aimed only at destruction, they might have finished the entire population of London on Monday itself. In the last chapter, I have given my brother's account in great detail. Never before in the history of the world had such a mass of human beings moved and suffered together. And this was no disciplined march, it was a stampede, gigantic and terrible, without order or aim. 6 million people, unarmed and without provisions. It was the beginning of the complete defeat of civilization, of the massacre of mankind. And over the blue hills, the glittering Martians went to and fro, taking possession of the country. They exploded any stores of powder they came upon, cut every telegraph, and wrecked railways here and there. They did not go beyond the central part of London that day. The Pool of London was an astonishing scene. Steamboats and shippings of all sorts lay there. People were fighting to get into them, fighting and confusion reigned there. My brother saw the six-star tall at Wimbledon. On Tuesday, the little party that consisted of my brother and the two women in the carriage was in dire need of food. People were fighting the farmers for food. On Wednesday, the three fugitives reached Chelmsford. Here their pony was seized by a committee of public supply. My brother didn't wait for food and pushed on at once towards the coast. Near Tillingham they came in sight of the sea and the most amazing crowd of shipping of all sorts and is possible to imagine. Close to the shore was a multitude of small fishing boats, English, Scotch, French, Dutch, and there were Swedish. Steam launches from the Thames yachts, electric boats, passenger boats, and neat white and grey liners from Southampton and Hamburg. There was even a warship inside, the Thunder Child. At the sight of the sea, Mrs. Elphinstone, this was the name of the doctor's wife, gave way to panic. She did not want to leave London. With great difficulty, they got her down to the beach where my brother struck a bargain with a steamer going to Ostend. They were also able to buy some food on the steamer. The little steamer was already on her way eastward when a Martian appeared, advancing along the muddy coast. It was the first Martian that my brother had seen. He was more amazed than terrified. Then he saw another one coming and yet another. They were all walking towards the sea, as if to stop the escape of numerous vessels. There was panic, all ships whistling, passing each other in a hurry. My brother saw the torpedo Thunderchild steaming headlong to the rescue of the threatened ship. The three Martians were regarding this new enemy in astonishment. The Thunderchild fired no gun, but simply drove full speed at them. It was probably this time that made the Martians not to fire the heat ray at Suddenly, it. The first Martian lowered his canister and fired black gas. One of them raised the heat ray and fired. It went through the iron of the ship's side like a white hot iron rod through paper. Then a flicker of flame rose through the steam and the Martians moved in an unsteady way. In a moment he was cut down, the guns of Thunderchild going off one after another. At the sight of the Martian's collapse, the captain on the ship yelled, and all the crowding passengers shouted together. Then they yelled again, for something black and long dropped through its middle parts, its ventilators and funnels spouting fire. But she was still alive and headed straight for the second Martian. Then, with a violent thud, the blinding flash, her decks, her funnels leaped forward. The Martian staggered with the violence of her explosion and crumpled up like a thing of cardboard. "Two!" yelled the captain. Everyone was shouting. The cheering was taken up by all in the crowding ships and boats driven out to sea. When the confusion cleared, the drifting bank of black vapor intervened. and nothing of the Thunder Child could be made out, nor could the third Martian be seen. Our little vessel continued to beat its way seaward. The coast grew faint. Then suddenly at sunset came the vibrations of guns, and a form of black shadows could be seen moving. Everyone struggled to the rail of the steamer, but nothing could be seen clearly. It was deep twilight when the captain cried out and pointed. My brother saw something rush up into the sky, and something flat and broad and very large that swept round in a vast curve, grew smaller, sank slowly, and vanished again into the grey night. And as it flew, it rained down darkness upon the land. It was the black smoke. Chapter 12. What We Saw. In the last two chapters, I have described the adventures of my brother. All through this period, the curate and I hid in an empty house at Halliford, where we could escape from the black smoke. The curate had joined me when the battle took place between the Martians and the artillery guns. My mind was occupied with anxiety for my wife. I imagined her terrified, in danger, and already mourning me as a dead man. My only consolation was that the Martians were moving Londonward and she was safe from their deadly attack. I grew very weary and irritable with the curate's constant flow of questions and his disappear. For 2 days we were hemmed in and by the black smoke. About noon on Monday, a Martian came across the fields and smashed nearly all the windows it touched. I decided to leave, so I collected all the food and drink I could. I also took a flannel shirt and a hat that I had found in one of the bedrooms. The curate could not help himself and immediately followed me. We started at about 5 o'clock. All along the road to Sunbury were dead bodies, horses as well as men scattered all over, overturned carts and luggage. Till Hampton Court we didn't see a single soul alive. At Twickenham we met the first men and women. They had no news to give us. Near Kew we found people running and the upper works of a Martian fighting machine loomed in sight over the housetops. We turned and hid in a shed nearby. The Martians were about us. They were not using the heat ray. They were simply picking up the terrified people one by one and tossing them into a great metallic carrier that projected behind them. The curate and I watched this scene in terror and shock. Perhaps the Martians had some other purpose for human beings rather than destroy them. We stood for a moment and then turned and jumped into a ditch. We stayed there until late that night. It was 11 o'clock when we dared to start again. We did not go on the road. We sneaked along hedgerows and through plantations. We came upon a white house within a walled garden, and in the pantry we found a store of food: two loaves of bread in a pan, an uncooked steak, and half of a ham. I give this detail because we were destined to exist on this top for the next fortnight. We also found nearly a dozen bottles of burgundy, tinned soaps, and salmon, and 2 tins of biscuits. I was urging the curate to eat when the thing happened that was to imprison us. First came a vivid green light, and then followed such a crash as I had never heard before or since. I was knocked against the door and fainted. When I came to my senses, the curate asked me not to move. The floor was covered with smashed crockery, and any movement would make a noise. "They are outside," the curate whispered to me. We did not move for 3 or 4 hours until dawn came. And then the light filtered in. What we saw was really horrifying. The greater part of the house had collapsed. We saw through the gap in the walls the body of the Martian, standing sentinel over the still glowing cylinder. Suddenly the right answer seemed to have dawned upon me. I whispered, "The fifth from Mars has struck this house and buried us under the ruins." God have mercy upon us, said the curate in a whisper. After hours we crawled, and by raising ourselves cautiously we looked out of the gap. What a vast change there was! The fifth cylinder must have fallen right into the house nearest to our. The building had completely vanished. A pit, a deep hole had been made by it, and other houses were not visible because of the mud around it. Our house had collapsed backward, only the kitchen, pantry, and scullery had escaped somehow by chance, and stood almost buried under the debris. The cylinder was already opened, and one of the fighting machines stood stiff and tall against the evening sky. Strange creatures were crawling slowly and painfully across the heaped mold near it. The machine was like a metallic spider with five jointed metallic legs and with extraordinary number of jointed levers, bars, and clutching tentacles about its body. But the Martians, they were huge round bodies, or rather heads, about 4 feet in diameter, each body having a face in the front. This face had no nostrils, but it had a pair of very large, dark colored eyes. Just beneath it was a kind of fleshy beak. In a group round the mouth were 16 slender, almost whip-like tentacles, arranged in two bunches of 8 each. These bunches were their hands. The greater part of their structure was the brain. Besides this were the bulky lungs into which the mouth opened, and the heart and its vessels. That was all. They were heads, merely heads, internal parts of the body, especially the intestines. They had none. They did not eat, much less digest. Instead, they took the fresh, living blood of other creatures and injected it into their veins. I watched them closely and saw them do this in the 15 days of my imprisonment. I must mention here another fact about the Martians. Instead of having green for a dominant color, the vegetable kingdom in Mars is of a vivid blood red color. At any rate, the seeds which the Martians brought with them gave rise to red colored outgrowths resembling the weeds on Earth. It grew at an alarmingly fast rate. It spread out by the side of the pit by the third or fourth day of our imprisonment. It grew very fast if there was a stream of water. No surviving human being saw so much of the Martians in action as I did. I take no credit for it, but I watched them closely, imprisoned in the depths for 15 days.